It's so great to be here live and hybrid, of course, with our friends online. So my name is Brian Tang. I'm the founding executive director of the LITE Lab at Hong Kong U. And it really is an honor to be here. I think I've been here at the FinTech Day at Hong Kong U since almost the very beginning, before I joined Hong Kong U. It's really wonderful. I'd like to also invite, first and foremost, let me invite our guests here in Hong Kong onto the stage, while our guests online will be joining us as well. So please, James and Irene, please join us up on stage. Please put your hands together to welcome them.
Thanks, Brian, and thanks very much, everybody, for attending. So I want to go through a very short presentation just on the results of some of the work that we've been doing in the really exciting world of Regtech. So just to start with a little bit of context, this was on the back of a number of things that the HKMA, as Brian has already said, it kind of initiated around about 15 months ago, and it started with a white paper. And what this white paper did was it looked at the market, and it basically, working with the HKMA, we talked to all of the banks, many of the FinTech companies and the Regtech companies, just to really understand what the state of play is in regards to Regtech in Hong Kong and what we want to be and what we want to achieve. And there was a number of recommendations that came out of that. 16 in total, a big group of those being the development of a talent pool. And actually, the other one that I think was really, really interesting, and these are all on the HKMA public website, was the Regtech Adoption Index. And what the Regtech Adoption Index told us was there is a big gap in skills and talent in and around this topic. But the market is really, really hungry to invest in this area. So what the HKMA then did is say, well, actually, why don't we then focus specifically on skills and capabilities and actually understand what that really means, and then come up with something that allows the market to tell us what we need to focus on, and then we will help them through that journey, again, to try and help push Regtech adoption in Hong Kong. And remember, this is on the back of helping Hong Kong to maintain its position as a global financial hub now and in the future. And this is a really, really important point, because if we want to maintain that status, we have to move with the times, and we have to make sure that we're seen around the world as this kind of FinTech, and obviously I have a bias on Regtech hub, so that we can take a lead in this area. And we need to make sure that we have the right skills and capabilities so that we can not only kind of create new solutions and come up with new ideas, but nurture that talent as well. And actually, there's some really interesting results that came out of the survey. So why don't I quickly dig into this? So what did we find? Well, we actually, working with the HKMA, we defined kind of 4 broad domains with 38 key skills and capabilities across things like soft skills, compliance skills, business skills, and technology. And the ones that I've highlighted here are the ones that were identified as having the key gap as it relates to the AIs, the banks, and the Regtechs and the virtual banks. So where they see a real gap in the market, and also where they want to invest. So things like collaboration and innovation from the soft skills perspective. So they want to work, the intent was to work more with the ecosystem. On the compliance side, it was more around actually the definition and automation of control. So they actually want to bring all kind of operational efficiency into the market. On the business side, no surprise, it was around kind of cyber process automation. Again, that kind of more practical area, but also customer experience. But I'll come on to that in a moment. And then finally, technology and data domains. Again, around cyber, around architecture, and around kind of system integration, so plumbing all the pipes together. So, you know, a really interesting kind of bag in terms of what those capabilities were, but where the market saw those gaps. I'll brush across this, but we basically talked to 158 institutions, both banks, Regtechs, and virtual banks. And we had 21 deep dive interviews. So this is primary research that we did within Hong Kong with the regulator. Now, what did we find? Well, what is the current state? The current state is there needs to be much more development of Regtech talent in the market. But the market told us that they want to get the basics right first. And, you know, across the board, certainly from a conventional bank perspective, but also the Regtechs and the VBs, they said they just want to get the basic and intermediate skills right because they know there's quite a big gap. So we need to get this right first. And they actually said 45% of the skills and capabilities were deemed as critical. So almost half of those 38 skills and capabilities, the market says, we really, really need this if we think we can move along the journey within Regtech adoption. But on that last point around the top 3 skill gaps, and I've already brought that to life a little bit, but this is basically the market telling us they want to see tangible things as well. They want to start somewhere. So they want to focus on automation, but they also want to they intend to collaborate more. So they want to work across and within the ecosystem more because they feel like they don't necessarily have those skills and capabilities in-house today. The other big thing, and I'm really glad we found this, was it's not just about technology. A lot of people, and I talk a lot to the big banks in town, and one of the first things they say when we talk about Regtech, and we'll get into this in a moment, is it's not about technology. Technology is an enabler, and we found this through this research. And actually, it's acknowledged that we need more people who can, what I would classify as the translators or the conductors, who understand the business side, the risk and compliance side, and can translate that into technology so that technology can be that enabler, which I think is a really, really important point. The other thing here, and the last point here on this slide, is around it's changed the way that we work today. Now, actually, the adoption of these technologies, FinTech and more specifically Regtech and what we're talking today, this is no longer a nice to have, it's a must have. Because as we've said, the pandemic has forever changed the market. It's actually forever changed the world. And we need to make sure that we adopt these technologies so that we can be competitive in the future. Because the other key thing here, and we are not going to get onto this necessarily, but the regulators themselves are also going through this digital transformation. So it's even more imperative that we have those in-house skills today. I've got 2 more slides and then we can get into the conversation. There is no surprise that actually there was quite a diverse range, and actually the reports on the website of the HKMA, you could dig into it, but the traditional banks were much more, I would say, conservative in what they want to do in terms of that level of investment. And that was around kind of cyber, automation, control. So kind of keeping the lights on, making sure that we're focusing on efficiency and steadily going through adoption. Whereas the virtual banks and the Regtechs were all about innovation. They were all about customer experience and architecture. So they want the ideas. They want to stay ahead of the game. And actually, one of the big things that did come out of the study, and actually when we're interacting with the 21 participants, was when we're thinking about these end-to-end technologies, or we're thinking about how we're going to apply Regtech technologies within our environment, we need to think about the customer and the customer value. It's not just about compliance. Actually, it's about digital transformation within our market and within our institutions. And that's a really important point and a slightly different lens, I think, than we sometimes see. And finally, what were the recommendations? Well, the recommendations were we need to make sure that we all stand behind some kind of a framework. We need to have training associated with that framework, and we want to make sure that there's some form of accreditation behind that. So we have some standardization in the market, so that actually we can all then rely on the fact that if we've followed these kind of curriculums or these education standards, we've got a baseline. And I think that's really important. We need to make sure that we've got key leadership sponsorship and people are leading it from the front. And actually, if you go back and look at the Regtech Adoption Index, one of the key attributes of the leading adopters are that the top of the house stand in front and say, no, we really mean business and we're going to do this. And then finally, we need to make sure that we're part of the community and we're building and participating in that ecosystem that we have. Thanks very much. That's a brief summary of the report.
Thanks so very much, James. That was a valuable cheat sheet if you didn't have time to read the whole report. So I think that really is helpful and encapsulates a lot of those aspects. So in some ways, James has highlighted the regulatory perspective on this, and we'll drill down on some of those, I'm sure. But I'd love to turn the floor now to some of the banking industry. So maybe you can flip onto the last slide there, James. So we're really fortunate to have representatives from the banking industry and industries that represent them too. So first and foremost, a latecomer to the talk, but very, very much welcome, Philip Khan. So Philip is a former banker over in HSBC before he joined HKIB. So for those that don't know this, Hong Kong Institute of Bankers, and he's a general manager for in the institute development. Now, HKIB is not on the slide, but they were specifically mentioned in the report in relation to one of the leaders of developing training, potentially in modules in this space, especially since they have developed other modules in the ECF space, and ECF stands for, the Enhanced Capacity Framework. So, Philip, love to hear more about your experience in relation to the ECF framework, and then specifically applying some of that to how HKIB is thinking about providing training and accreditation for the Regtech space. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Brian. That was a very good summary of your, I think it was like a 54-page report. So it's very short and very concise. If you look at the slide on your screen right now, you see the left-hand side, where one of the recommendations is a enhanced competency framework. And that's what we've been working with the Hong Kong MA on doing, developing a ECF program for FinTech specifically. The ECF program really is an accredited program, okay? So there are certain standards we have to meet. And the reason why we were chosen by the MA is because we've been working a lot of other ECF programs, such as anti-money laundering, retail wealth management, cybersecurity. These types of ECF programs were already introduced by us in partnership with the Hong Kong MA. So it made sense for them to come to us again to develop a FinTech one. And originally, when we started developing the ECF and FinTech, we started debating, should we do that the old-fashioned way, which is we develop it ourselves using people that we were familiar with in industry. Pretty soon, it was obvious to us, because that FinTech is such a new and such a dynamic area, we really couldn't rely on our existing program development to create this. And so we went out to the universities, because a lot of the universities already either have their own FinTech programs or are creating their FinTech programs at the bachelor's degree level, and some even at the master's degree level. And this is what we went out to do, to partner with the universities to develop this ECF program. The program originally, I think it had like 6 different modules. And because we keep adding to, I think we're up to 8 or 9 right now, modules in this ECF FinTech program. And it's going to be launched hopefully by December this year.
Great, thank you. Any teasers in relation to what the headings, for example, of that program might look like?
It'll be the typical A, B, C, D of FinTech. So your artificial intelligence, your blockchain, cloud, data, that type of thing would be covered in the ECF and FinTech program.
Oh, this is the FinTech one, not the Regtech one as yet.
Well, Regtech is built into that, into the ECF and FinTech. So as was mentioned earlier, technology for technology's sake really doesn't help in a Regtech space. There has to be a problem that you're trying to solve with that technology. Okay, so although some of the ECF and FinTech looks at the underlying technology, really the focus isn't on that. It's not a techie course. It's more of a course for bankers, because understanding Regtech, it involves a lot of fundamental banking skills as well. as the technology skills. So that's really what this ECF program is trying to focus on. And it's probably different than other programs that are out there today.
I see. And would the target audience be front office bankers, senior, mid, or junior bankers, or really kind of the mid office or the back office, and which departments?
Actually, the audience could be anybody. This program is much more specialized. So it's for people that are in technology already, or people that are considering changing to technology focus. Now, I'm not talking about your programmers and coders. I'm not talking about these types of technology people. I'm talking about product managers, people that are responsible for innovating products, not just the products themselves, but how we distribute those products to customers. These are the types of people that would benefit from this ECF program. Now, from a regulatory perspective, obviously, the target for this group would be the people in your regulatory compliance or your financial crimes compliance space. Now, Regtech has been really focusing on, the AML and transaction monitoring parts of the business much more currently. But I think going forward, it's going to expand to other areas as well. You'll see in the recent announcement on Wealth Management Connect, that just gives you one real example of where Regtech is being used. And that is the onboarding of customers. Because of the social distancing, the fact that borders are closed, we cannot onboard customers face-to-face, right? So WMC, as part of that, allows the banks to onboard customers remotely. Now, that whole onboarding process, that is a Regtech tool that's being used, using biometrics and things like that to onboard people. So that's just one real-life example of Regtech being in use.
Okay, great. And then one last question along these lines, Philip. So especially since you're speaking at a university, so I see a few younger faces there. So we've got some students here as well. So this is training for people who are at banks. So just to share with you all, it's continuous learning, it's lifelong learning that all of us have to go through. So what modality is being planned? Are they, especially with COVID and the like, are you doing it online primarily, or you're creating a curriculum?
This program will be held using flex learning. So it's going to be online. So using Zoom in a virtual classroom situation. So it's a real time. The students are on a video conference, but the instructor is there to answer questions, chat, annotate, use whatever tools that Zoom has available to encourage engagement of the students.
Super, thanks. So now bankers will learn what the students have had to do for the last 18 months, right? Live online on Zoom. With that, I'd like to turn my attention now to Irene here on the stage. Irene Lee is my partner in crime of sorts. We've been co-chairs of the Regtech committee, the FinTech Association, for a few years. I don't want to count how many years.
Also 3 years.
Okay, 3 years. It seems longer than that.
Yeah.
And we both recently got kicked upstairs. So now we're both sitting on the board of the FinTech Association because we ran out of our statutory limit time. But Irene leads Regtech initiatives over at UBS. So would love to hear your thoughts, Irene, in relation to this new initiative. I mean, large banks like yourselves have frankly been doing a lot of training and preparation already. So maybe in the first instance, speaking about what you and UBS is doing, and then wearing the FinTech Association hat of Hong Kong, what you're hearing from the industry here. Thank you.
Yeah, when topic of today is talking about like skill sets and training, right? So I have a very strong feelings on all these because this is exactly the efforts that our bank or even myself is going through, because we are facing a very interesting and exciting moments where there are a lot of new stuff, not just new stuff internally, and also some pressure from the external environment, meaning that like those VBs, no other counterparties that can actually perform the banking services like us, and also from our external customers as well, because many of the customers are executives in the startups, or they are venture capitals that they are looking for new investment for new economies kind of areas. So as the conventional banks like us, or for the other industry as well, they are traditional banks. So they are more looking at like human touches, client experience and all that. And now we are facing a pressure to transform. The pressure is during the COVID, and then now transform it as a new normal. So the skill sets that we are really lacking is all around the kind of personnel that knows how to transform the technology, and also know the use cases and business cases, and then know how to adopt the technology into a solutional basis, and also know how to control it. So even myself as a compliance officer in a big bank like that, I am not equipped as understand or familiar with all these languages and computer languages. So now we are like looking at what are the programs that is available internally, like the ECF that HKMA is proposing, and also for the competency framework that HKMA is looking at revamping, where they are looking at more CPD hours in on the technology side of things. So these are the ongoing planning that the banks is looking at internally and externally. So that's the process that we're going through. Perhaps in the later chats that I can share with some of the interesting use case where we are looking at applications or specifications, and how compliance officers need to scrutinize it to make sure it is in compliance with the regulations. But however, we may not be equipped to understand the language, and we also need to reach out to external for consultation. So that's the interesting use case I would be sharing at the later.
Well, actually, why don't you share that now? Because I think it really is linked to James's point. Again,
Okay.
it's the earlier slide about the three aspects, and maybe James, if you don't mind switching to that slide, thanks so much. I'm so glad you did these slides. You know, the first one was really the translator is your phrase,
Yeah.
right, James? So maybe
Yeah.
if you can speak briefly to that, what did your findings find in terms of the gap, the need for the translator?
I think it actually goes to what Philip said around product owners, around people that understand the business, but also have an understanding and a background potentially in the risk and compliance space, but can also talk the same language as the technologists within these institutions. And you know what? This skill set is incredibly rare. And all of the institutions, and actually all of the consulting firms, are all looking for these skill sets and capabilities, because the market is absolutely crying out for it. So there's a number of different, I call translator, conductor, you know, there's a number of these different skill sets and roles that we need to make sure that we have. And maybe just elaborating on that, and if I look at these results, there's a couple of, you know, quite specific roles coming out, and they kind of are linked to the bold areas that I've highlighted. So one is around that conductor, and to me, that's around that kind of soft skill, but also the business analysts and the solution analysts. There's the security guard, which basically needs to understand what is the impact to my control environment. We heard a great talk about CBDCs earlier around privacy and security. As we apply more technologies within our environment, there are absolutely going to be more security and cyber considerations. So we need to make sure that we have the right capability in there. The other one that I think is key is what I would classify as the automator. And this is essentially working through an end-to-end use case. And again, I would go back to having that, what is the customer journey through that, whether or not it's onboarding all the way through to trade, and making sure that we identify what the problem points are between that, but not looking at them in isolation, actually looking at them from the front, the middle, and the back office. And again, you need the conductor who understands all of that stuff. You need the security guard to make sure that it's going to be built in a secure way, but you also need the automator so that they can actually then build the technology. So there's some really interesting things that came out of this study that you can really kind of pull apart. And then finally, and probably the most important one, the architect. And making sure that actually we have a consistent technology. I know I said it's not about technology, but essentially it needs to be enabled by technology. That architect role, again, incredibly challenging to find in the market, especially with banking risk and compliance understanding.
Love the analogies in terms of breaking it down. Although I was picturing something that had a conductor, a security guard, an automator, and an architect, the new style bank, right? As according to James. But maybe you can share some examples, use case that you had mentioned.
Yeah, recently there's a lot of different hot topics. I can use CBDC, right? Earlier on, there's some lecturer and professor briefing the CBDC project and also the MCBDC project. So internally or within the industry, we are looking at the impact when CBDC is coming to the ground, or HK dollars is coming to the ground. What will be the opportunities for the bank to involve? So we are looking at how to run the project to include CBDC in our rollout. So in the past, when we're looking at the governance of the project, we are thinking of, hey, it must be COO leading it. But now we are looking at the T-shaped kind of project style. That's the paper that the authority is setting up. And technology is always on the top first because they need to explain to us what CBDC is like, what is the technology, and what is the definition of CBDC. And on the top, compliance is looking at what is the relevant regulations would apply. Is it similar as a securities regime that we are looking at, or actually it's not an investment? It is actually a dollar, a M0 kind of currency, which is we need to apply a separate set of regulations. So depending on the internal use case, like how do we use CBDC for our banking services? Like we may deploy CBDC and our settlement process, or we can actually use CBDC wrapping as a structured product, or wrapping as a commodities, or even a Bitcoin kind of investment. So looking at different of the use cases and business demand, we may need to categorize them into the different bucket, applying for the regulation, do the gap analysis, and then after the initial gap analysis, we will look at how to deploy it in the operational process. So not just technology is just to explain to us what it is. And then we, as a compliance officer or other risk function, may need to identify what are the no-go or no-go situation. So from today's regulations, can we can we deploy it, or do we need to even enhance our internal policies and ensure that investor protections are all in place? So these are the pains that as a compliance officer or as even a project manager may face. There are a lot of sets of open questions to solve, and compliance officer needs to look at it. And we are not just tell them, hey, these are the rules, read it by yourself. It cannot work like this anymore, because we are now like a technology partner for them to understand the technology languages, and also to tell them what are the requirements that they will need to enhance before even roll out to the client. So these are the progresses that we are facing on.
So I used to be in big banks, so I know how complex it can be. So in the use case that you had mentioned, so who would be the internal stakeholders? What departments are involved in addition to compliance?
I think everyone that can be a process owner. So depending on the use cases, like if this is just the settlement, then you can imagine that the settlement teams, the operational teams, any one of the stakeholders within the value chain would be the stakeholders. It could be everyone.
No, the more give solid examples, because to be honest, those are the people that need to be trained.
Yes.
Right. It's not just the compliance that needs to be trained. Every single one of these need to have the right skill sets and mindsets. And again, because and for those that haven't worked in banks before, or some people just work in one function, right? I used to work in legal, you work in compliance, so we used to work well together. Yep. It's only when you work on some of these projects, then you work. Well, I saw that face. That you work with IT, you work with ops, you work with the front office and middle office. Like so maybe you can give some colors to the kind of departments that are involved.
Yeah, say for example the ECF, right? So when Philip mentioned about, oh, these are the different thematic topics around ECF, and when we're looking at which part of the functions or which personnel should be in scope for the ECF, we are so surprisingly there could be a lot of overlaps, because along the chain in the first line and second line of the defense, we have different functions. So we have client-facing staff, we have middle office, we have back office like us. So first line, second line, even the third line for the audit. But however, each of the defense, each of the personnel may have opportunity to get involved to look at or assess the technology adoptions. And they may need to have those skill sets as well. So those thematics ECF would apply universally to all those stakeholders. So we are looking at, oh, as a compliance officer, will I be in scope for cybersecurity, FinTech, Regtech, and overlapping all and scattered around. So we are like, this is really a cross-functional and cross-divisional kind of skill set approach. So when we design our own program, this is really not easy. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so as those of you who've heard me before on stage, I call Regtech the secret sauce, right? So it really is used by financial institutions, but by fintechs and by virtual asset service providers as well. But the difference is that with a lot of fintechs, technology is at its core, the DNA. With traditional institutions, you have to backward train a lot of people in this. Now, I would now wanted to turn to our other guest. I haven't forgotten about you, Chai-Kit. So Chai-Kit, in many ways, is Irene and my counterpart in Singapore. So Chai-Kit is the chair of the Singapore FinTech Association's Regtech subcommittee, but he's also a founder of a Regtech. So this is all about Regtech adoption, right? So when we knocked at the door of the HKMA and the other regulators to push for Regtech, I think we've achieved the first step, which is now awareness. So Regtech is definitely on the agenda by the regulators, which is fantastic. But really, this is about adoption, the next level, the harder part. And folk like Chai-Kit are at the forefront because he's a solution provider, and there are lots of Regtechs there trying to sell their fantastic tools to these financial institutions who are scratching their head going, what does that do? Why do I need that? How do I integrate that? So Chai-Kit, would love to hear your thoughts in relation to the importance of the right skill sets and mindsets, and maybe reflect upon some of what Irene and James and Philip had mentioned, because so who do you sell to within the bank? Which department, right? And how much of it is still educational from your part, and you're doing the education? Take it away, Chai-Kit.
Okay, no problem. Thanks, Brian, for having me on this panel. I've actually taken in quite a lot from the other panelists in terms of James, Irene, as well as Philip's comments earlier on. And a lot of them resonated very well with me in terms of what I do. So I would sort of say that in just high level first, in terms of what this report have actually fleshed out, and James did such a great job in summarizing them. It's actually fantastic because in terms of the need to have this, is no longer a good to have anymore. So we passed that stage. It's already a must have, full stop, right? And then the next step is that and a lot of, even from a solution provider perspective, a lot of people blind people with science, meaning that they try to put the cart in front of the horse, if you've heard of the analogy before, right? So if the cart is in front of the horse, example, if technology is in front of the problem, then it's a technology trying to find a problem to solve, rather than there being identified problems and you're trying to use some technology to solve it, right? That's quite a different starting point there. And to Irene's point around first, second, third line of defense, fantastic terms that we're all very familiar with, because I myself have worked in banks as compliance heads before. And so I generally bucket them up into two categories, right? Preventive control and detective control. So all banks or all financial institutions or fintech or whatever you name it, anybody who provides the financial services or pseudo financial services, depending on the stage of regulations in each jurisdiction, there will be combinations of, I would call them controls that already exist, right? Maybe some of them are slightly less mature, some of them are less sophisticated with combinations of manual and analog processes. So different people are at different stage of maturity in this entire digitization journey. So coming back to what companies like ourselves, Cynopsis Solutions, work with. We work with a wide variety. We're in the domain that I think Philip mentioned about KYC AML. We're in that domain, which is where people, I call it where there's fire underneath the chair, where people are more willing to put their money down and buy something when something is imperfect, right? So that's where we're at. And so basically we sell to a varieties of traditional banks, digital banks, fintech companies, remittance companies, VASPs, as well as a group that wasn't really mentioned earlier on by the panelists. It's actually all the non-financial services sector, which we typically in the compliance world, we call them DNFBP, right? Designated non-financial business and professions. So it includes accountants, lawyers, corporate secretaries, casinos, precious stones, metals dealers, and real estate agents, right? Because they need to also do the AML KYC in the same fashion and definition as that of what a bank or a financial institution have to do as well. So the requirements are fairly similar. So the beauty of Regtech solution is its ability to be, I'm staring at the screen, multidisciplinary. It can cut across multiple verticals within various sectors as well. So I'll sort of say that now. I'm sure there are other questions, but I think we talked quite a fair bit about skill sets. And I think coming as a ex-compliance officer, and I still teach compliance as on a part-time basis to compliance officers as well as to the sector. I think the mindset is also very important, and maybe it will be addressed later on, and the compliance culture, the tone from the top. So think of compliance as not the big C that refers to a department. Think of compliance as a small c that the organization needs to discharge its regulatory obligation, right? And then it will mean that everybody who is involved one way, shape, or another in the various preventive and detective control that already exist in the bank, got to think about how to use Regtech to make their job better. Otherwise, you don't have a better regulatory outcome.
Great. Thanks so much for that, Chaikit. I want to explore a little bit what you said. So when I asked who you sell to, I meant when you approach a financial institution, which department?
Oh, okay.
Is it compliance? Is it procurement? Is it front office? Is it AML? Is it?
Okay. At the end of the day, the tool is going to be used by compliance department, right? That's generally speaking, right? But of course, compliance being the small c that has got different types of user. Let's say, for example, in the entire customer journey that like James mentioned. So you may have operations people being involved and compliance people being the level 2 and maybe senior management being the level 3 to approve high risk clients, for example. So typically we will hit the compliance folks first as well as the business people, because ultimately the business people will need to pick up the bill, of whatever solutions that they will need to take on. Now, there are obviously people out there or in larger banks and outfit that they may have, I would call them the innovation department and the fintech department. For what it's worth, our past experience hasn't been very promising when we speak to some of these people, because generally speaking, I may be speaking to the wrong people, but generally, anecdotally, it seems that a lot of these departments do not actually have money to spend. They have money to do POC, but they don't have money to spend and do that. They are not the user at the end of the day. So, a suggestion would be to hit the actual user who's going to use this, and they will push for it internally rather than for us to get into the banks or FI's internal politics.
Great. No, thank you. And I wanted you to speak to that because that shows the complexity on the adoption part, right? So even if you have the fantastic solution using cutting edge AI or ABCD, AI, blockchain, cloud, or data, suddenly if you approach a big monolithic bank, who do you speak to? Are they equipped to, importantly, do they have budget, right? So this is some of the complexities in terms of the adoption and the education space. I wanted to share a little bit, take the liberty here, since we're here in Hong Kong U, and I thought this is a great topic to discuss because it is about education ultimately, to speak to some of the things that we're doing here as well. So from a quote unquote academic perspective, my LITE lab, actually, we're talking about experiential and interdisciplinary learning, but really it's about project-based learning. I see some of my students here, and some of them actually, James, are working with a large financial institution on automation, right? And they're law students. So the idea here is that we're trying to get them to not be technicians, but to understand tech and to talk tech and to do and the like. So I think, to me, I look forward to seeing how it develops in terms of other modules, and maybe Irene can speak to this a little bit as well. But at the FinTech Association, so after we stepped down, we have some wonderful new co-chairs, one of whom is the head of compliance for APAC in Citibank, and she was the one that said, oh, she wants for us to do more in the Regtech training space, and so LITE Lab is actually collaborating with them. My approach is really in relation to more experiential learning and project-based learning. So rolling up your sleeves, actually working up POCs, so that you know about the pain points. It's not just a hypothetical sage on the stage kind of approach. I don't know whether you wanted to speak a little bit more about that from wearing the FinTech Association hat.
Yeah, I think in FinTech Association during the board meeting, we are looking at some internal and external engagement to see what's things that we can explore with the members, and some of the voices that we collected from the different channels, like from the member survey or informally, we understand that they need something from the association on the training aspect, so to leverage the resources for the members, because we may have consultants, we may have universities, lecturers, we also have banks representative and also providers. So we have all the resources and knowledge skill set there. So it's just more to frame it into a program to provide some training kind of resources to our members. And we also look at collaborate with the external partners, like maybe the academic or finance or the other HKIB. Maybe in the future we can collaborate with you, Philip, on
Definitely.
assigning some of the FinTech Association / HKIB program for the wider members, including the students. So they are the future talents, and we need to build a talent pool, particularly quote what you have said, Hong Kong as the talent pool, and also to attract overseas talent as well. So I think as a FinTech Association, we can do more to drive that agenda as part of the Hong Kong role. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Irene.
Right, Brian.
Yes.
Since we're talking to the law students here, maybe I can share a real life example of a solution. I used to work in HSBC. I used to be part of the capital markets group, and we did a lot of IPOs. For the students that don't know, IPOs, there is quite a bit of legal documentation that's involved. So in some cases, over 60 pages of legal docs. Okay, everything in those legal docs have to be verified, and the lawyers spend a lot of time to verify those things. What if you could have a solution that identified things that have to be verified, things that are nice to have verified, and things that aren't necessary, and totally reduce your workload for evaluating that IPO document? That is something that would definitely benefit the banks and the bankers and the lawyers involved. And actually, there is a solution out there right now that does that. Now, that's just an example of Regtech.
Great. Thanks for mentioning that, Philip. And I couldn't help but smile behind my mask here, because some of my LITE Lab students are actually working with that company right now. So again, my students work with startups and also work with financial institutions in terms of developing these products. So again, thanks for that. Chai-Kit, I wanted to turn to you now in your other capacity. So you're dialing in from Singapore. Would love to hear some sharings you have in terms of, the MES is a very progressive regulator, and would love to hear what your impressions of what they're doing to promote the skill sets and mindsets kind of aspects, which is really quite important. And again, I think, for example, they fund the training, they subsidize the training. So please speak to that, Chai-Kit.
Yeah, I can. I wanted to talk about that earlier on anyway. I think there are two parts to this, right? The first being that at the national level, the Singapore government is known to has been known to be promoting, this concept of smart nation for quite a number of years, and encouraging the whole population to go on reskilling, upskilling, whatever you call it, for a number of years, and they're giving money for that, so they're subsidizing that training. So for a lot of, and especially during the last 2 years pandemic period, the level of grant that is given out, it is actually quite a lot. So they work with this Institute of Banking and Finance, which is actually the training arm of the government within that works with MAS, that basically gives up to almost 95% of the course fee in grant amount, right? So if you sort of say take up a course that is accredited and meeting the competency standards and all the accreditation, it gets funded for almost 95% of the course fee, which is phenomenal. And then at the Regtech solutions adoption front, and MAS, the MAS have also been very generous last year and also being topped up this year. I think it's about like $40 million grant thereabout on Regtech adoptions of solutions by financial institutions, not just the banks, but as long as you're a financial institution, you're a licensee, you are able to avail yourself and apply for the grant for the adoption of solutions like ours, as well as others as well. So that's where put the money where the mouth is.
Super, thank you. And I know some of our regulators are joining online. We had more than nearly 500 kind of sign up. So we want to hear about new ideas so that maybe we can introduce some of that here as well. I wanted to turn a little bit now to Q&A, and I think the two main questions that seem to be popping up are, firstly, Philip, how much do your courses cost? And then secondly, James, will the PowerPoints be, can we share the PowerPoints? Okay, thank you, James. Philip?
Pricing, we still haven't decided the pricing yet. It's going to be decided probably by mid-November. We still have a number of committees that we need to get approvals from before we can announce the pricing. Now, I know another audience member asked about segmented pricing or subsidized pricing. That's something that we normally don't do. But I know the Hong Kong MA has a number of subsidy programs already. They're subsidizing this program that we're having for students like the ones in the audience. It's called the Bridging Program, Future Banking Bridging Program. And it's really to introduce students to the financial industry. And one of the modules of this is talking about technology and fundamental banking skills like compliance and AML and things like that.
Great. So obviously, from the questions on pricing, you've got an interest customer base there. I mean, and we know that there's interest because I'm fortunate to be part of the Hong Kong U FinTech course that just celebrated its 100,000th kind of online learner. Now, see, so there definitely is, and mind you, that's across the world. So I think in every single continent, in every single country. So there definitely is demand and interest where that's concerned. We're now down to the last 4 minutes of our panel. So I wanted to go around the virtual table here. If you have a one sentence piece of advice or takeaway to Regtechs in terms of how they can promote the mindsets and skill sets, what would it be? So the first question is on Regtechs. So you're advising the solution providers, how can they, and then the second time I'll go around will be, what is your one sentence advice or takeaway you have for financial institutions? I'm going to start with you, James, because you've had a long time to think about this.
Can I do it the other way around?
Please.
One of the key things actually that we found from the report, but also some of the other research that we've done, is that the banks need to engage way more with the ecosystem and with the Regtech vendors to help actually shape the solutions in the local jurisdictions so that they can become compliant themselves. Because that's the only way that the Regtech vendors are really going to learn and understand how that can work. From a Regtech perspective, what would I suggest? I think engage with one another and share ideas and share stories, because there's a lot of really great, and obviously I'm sitting in Hong Kong and I have a slight Hong Kong bias. I've been here for quite a long time. There's some fantastic solutions and vendors here, and we really want to help build the Regtech ecosystem within Hong Kong to, all the way back to my initial slides, to make sure that we maintain Hong Kong's reputation as a global financial hub, and it has to be a fintech hub.
Okay, thanks so much. Irene?
Brian, you asked me to summarize as one sentence. My answer would be, it is difficult to summarize it in one sentence because, yes. So
I say one, but I know you guys will multiply that. So I started with one.
yeah, so to me now, it is so agile, right? I don't even know what will be changing in the couple of months or in a couple of years. It is like we are facing a very evolving environment. So what we are trying to is to, as a learner, adapter, and also a follower, leader, follower, adapter, and evolver. So we are like wearing a multiple hats, just looking at what is ahead of the wave. But I think what James, Philip, and Chi mentioned about is very important is on the mindset. So we are not technicians, so we have to be very innovative in a sense. So thinking out of the box. So for compliance officer, maybe in the past, the impression is we always say no to new things, but now we are embracing the risk together to also advise more innovative way. So this is not in one sentence. Thank you.
Fair enough. Thank you. Philip, your thoughts, please. What advice you might give to Regtech solution providers and then to FIs.
Okay, for Regtech, I think you guys need to understand banking a lot more. You have to understand the issues that bankers face, the regulatory concerns, the customer experience concerns, these types of things. And the fact that the solution that you're providing has to be invisible to the customer. Otherwise, it's very difficult to adopt. My advice to the banks, data. I think without data, and we're trying to get banks to share data, even within the bank, not just talking about bank to bank, but even within the bank, we see a lot of silos between different departments. Banks have to share that data amongst themselves, within themselves, and with each other as well.
Thank you. Topic near and dear to my heart, and we'll have another session on that one. I think data sharing and the like. Last but not least on the panel, Chai Kit, as a former compliance officer, right? So you.
Yes, I've been on both sides of the fence, right? So I think for the banks themselves, the key thing is that when you talk to a Regtech vendor, obviously they are of different sizes, right? You don't expect a 3-man startup to actually provide you enterprise grade service level, right? So, but then that it works both ways, which is to say that for the smaller startups or Regtech companies, you can't expect the banks to sort of lower their standards, securities, and all that to accommodate you. So there need to be a meeting of minds from both angles, so that then you can actually have a more whether harmonious or whether a more collaborative relationship going forward. Because otherwise, if you have a larger organization literally trying to rip off the ideas of the small players, then on the other side is a very long sales cycle and nothing gets done, and then these guys goes out of business. Now, on the other hand, if the Regtech providers are just saying that everything is on the cloud, I blind you with signs, then I don't do much about security and so on and so forth, then you put your customer at risk of non-complying with some other regulations, right? In the pursuit of better compliance outcome, which is it's a lose-lose situation.
What great sharing from all of you from all these different perspectives. I guess for me to close off, I just want to reiterate the topic title that we came up with, which is really skill sets. So skill sets is one thing. Skill sets, you all at university, you were at university, you learn certain skills and certain knowledge, but really it's about mindsets, right? I mean, especially with something like this, it's about how do you work. You may be trained in one area, you may love that area, but guess what? You need to work with other people in other areas. You need to understand where they come from, what they care about, use their language. And this applies whether you're in the legal side or the tech side or the front office side or the ops side. So that would be my takeaway to all of you. Thank you very much all. Please put your hands together again to thank our virtual and live audience here. hopefully everybody benefited from this. This was just the beginning of a discussion because, as you can have heard, this is not an easy topic. For those of you still at university, you are starting. So in other words, if you can learn these skills now, all the better, because you heard James, they're hiring, okay? And everybody is hiring. But more importantly, we have all these people who working in these big financial institutions. They need to learn these skills. Hopefully, we all working together can upskill those. And as James mentioned, position Hong Kong as a major financial hub around the globe, not just as it has been for IPOs. And Philip, my past life was in IPOs, but also in future in fintechs. Now we're looking at the new ways of finance and technology. Let me pass it over to Edith. Thank you once again, everyone here.